All right, Abby, let's talk longboard design. It's always super exciting to get a new longboard, and I'm really excited to help you out. So, in this video, we'll talk about a key principle in surfboard design that's going to translate to all the aspects of the longboard that I'll go over. And then I'll make some recommendations for you so that you can choose the board that fits the kind of waves that you'll be surfing and your surfing goals. So, we take a look at this graph here. Pretty much every aspect of a longboard sits on this spectrum between maneuverability and glide. We can define maneuverability as the responsiveness of the board. How much does that board move or change direction when we provide an input to it? And then we can talk about glide. Let's define glide as momentum in a singular direction. So how much does that board carry its momentum in a singular direction when we point it and we want to ride that wave on that line? So if we talk about the waves that we'll be riding, for big waves, for powerful beach breaks, or for junky waves, we'll probably want a board that errs on the side of maneuverability. We want to be able to change our line on that wave, make adjustments, and not be set in a singular direction. Now, if we're surfing small waves, powerless waves, or perfect point breaks, we'll probably favor glide, that momentum in a singular direction as we cruise through really soft sections or just cruise down the line of a perfect wave. We'll want that board to be able to glide really well. And so just thinking about your primary goal of cross-stepping and the kinds of waves that you're surfing, which will probably be more on this side, we're going to want a board that is more on this side of the spectrum, that favors glide, that momentum in a singular direction. With that being said, we do still need maneuverability in our surfboards. If you think about doing that turn to set up the cross step and set up the nose ride, we need maneuverability to make that happen. We need that board to change direction. But we also don't want a board that is super responsive to every little input that we make on it. And ideally, we're going to be looking for a board that favors glide. So as we talk about the different aspects of the surfboard, we can see which aspect where we're able to favor glide over maneuverability while still maintaining a balance. So let's talk about length. 8.6 is probably the smallest size we can consider a longboard. 10.0, biggest size. Generally, I think somewhere between 9.2 and 9.6 is the ideal size board for most people. This board allows you the glide, that momentum, nicely sized, and it also allows you some maneuverability. Now those boards on the 10 or the 9.8, the 9.10, 10.0 spectrum, really hard to turn. They're giant boards, but somewhere in this range, the 9.2 to 9.6 is really what I find ideal for pretty much everybody. Okay, construction, polyurethane versus epoxy. You own a torque board right now, which is an epoxy surfboard, and these boards sit more on top of the surface of the water, which means that they're more responsive. They're more maneuverable to our inputs. The inputs that we put in the board are more active than the inputs that the water puts on it, if that makes sense. If we go on the other side of the spectrum, we have polyurethane boards. Now, these boards sink more into the water. When we put that rail into the face of the wave, they really engage with the wave and harness the power of the wave to provide that momentum, that push forward. And so my recommendation for you is that you go with a polyurethane board for your next surfboard. I think polyurethane boards are typically just much easier to learn how to cross step on. They're going to provide that nice momentum in a singular direction, and you're going to be able to start feeling out your cross steps better on a polyurethane than you would an epoxy surfboard. Now, if we talk about the tails, we have very narrow tails and very wide tails. Now, if we look at a lot of like classic surfboards from the 60s, 70s, 80s, a lot of them have super wide tails. And honestly, these wide-tailed surfboards can be super awesome and really weak, gutless, tiny waves. Now, if I think about the reefs in San Diego, like these boards go great there because these waves barely break. They're very small, and that big, wide tail offers a lot of glide in those weak, gutless waves. But with that being said, you lose a lot of maneuverability when you have a big tail. If we go on the other side to narrow tails, these narrow tails can be super responsive when you step on them. They'll turn the board on a dime. It's quick to change direction, but we do lose a lot of that stability, a lot of that glide. And so my recommendation for you is to try to find a board that has a tail somewhere in the middle here. You want a tail that is not so big where it's going to hinder your ability to maneuver, to change positioning. But you also don't want a tail that's so narrow that when you get back on the back third of that board, it's really going to change direction hard. That makes it harder to learn how to cross step when that tail's really responsive and can change direction quickly. So somewhere in the middle there. And I don't think it matters if it's a square tail or a round tail. I think just looking at that overall area of the back third of the board, you want something that's pretty neutral. Next design aspect is the midpoint. So we have boards that have the midpoint in the back third, the midpoint in the middle, or the midpoint in the top third. So these boards, they're typically called pigs, that have the midpoint in the back. These offer a ton of maneuverability. Then we have boards that have the midpoint a bit more up front. These boards will offer a lot of stability. And then we have boards that are a bit neutral, midpoint right in the middle. Now these pig boards, they go much slower than the other long boards, and they really take exact proper positioning to activate them to really be surfing with flow. So they're a bit more for the advanced surfer, wouldn't recommend them. These midpoint forward boards are great, they're pretty stable, they'll glide really well, but when you want to turn that board or adjust the positioning, you have a lot of board up here in the top part of that board, which it's a lot of swing weight, if that makes sense. Bit harder to turn a board with that midpoint forward. And so what I recommend is finding that board with the midpoint neutral. The midpoint neutral, these are the most common longboards that you'll find, and I find that they just feel really natural and that you have a really nice balance of being able to glide on them by getting in that middle trim zone and then being able to maneuver them by getting on the back. So midpoint middle is really what I think you should be looking for in your new longboard. Next design aspect, the rails. I think this is probably the most important aspect to consider when you're choosing your new longboard. So we have thick rails on one end, which is going to provide a ton of glide. They're going to paddle really fast, really easily, and they're going to go in one direction really nicely with a ton of momentum. Then we have thin rails. Now we can describe these rails as kind of pinched, and these rails will offer a lot of maneuverability, a lot of grip in the wave. And then we have the rails that are a bit neutral. My recommendation, because this is the most important aspect of design when choosing a board, is that you don't want to go too thick and you don't want to go too thin. Again, I think you want something pretty neutral, and I think the best way to find out what is neutral for you is just feeling a lot of rails, feeling a lot of surfboards. Pick up the boards that you're thinking of buying at the shop, and if it feels bulky, it's probably too thick. And if you pick up a board at the shop and it feels pretty thin, probably too thin. This is really an aspect of design where the more boards you try, the more you'll know what rails you really enjoy surfing. Because every rail is shaped differently. It's very hard to say, like no two boards really have the same rail. They're all have their own nuance and their own unique shape. But finding that bit of neutral rail where you pick that board up and you feel like, okay, this board feels nice, it feels good, it feels like I can stand on this board and it's going to support me, and it's not too big, not too bulky, I think that's what you should be looking for in your next longboard. All right, next aspect of design is the fin. Now this one is super important. The rule that I always heard was that your fin should at least be as many inches as your board is in feet. Now, if we go on this side of the spectrum, we can say that a 9-inch fin and below really favors maneuverability. Fin that's 10-inch or even 11-inch, I've even seen 12-inch fins before. Those are fins that are going to provide a lot of glide, a lot of momentum in that singular direction, and it's going to be really beneficial for cross-stepping. I've really enjoyed riding 10-inch fins. I've even had an 11-inch fin, really enjoyed that. And so I think having at least a 10-inch fin is going to be ideal for you if your goal is to cross-step. And we can even look at the shapes of these fins. This is also super important. On this side, we have a fin that's let's look at the surface area. The surface area of the fin. This fin has a low surface area. It gets skinnier and skinnier as it gets to the tip. This is a pretty standard shaped fin. We'll call it a neutral surface area. And this fin has a ton of surface area, all the way from the bottom to the very tip. And so these fins really kind of take away the maneuverability of your surfboard. But what I've really enjoyed is finding that 10-inch fin that has this kind of raked tip this more narrow tip. And I found that it's a really, really great balance of having the glide of a big fin, but still getting some great maneuverability from it. So if you can find a 10-inch fin or even an 11-inch fin that has, you know, this kind of narrower tip, I think that's amazing. And also this, you know, standard shaped fin, also really, really nice. I think if you can find a 10-inch fin that has this more standard shape, it's going to suit you very well. And lastly is the fin placement. Now we can either put the fin at the very back of the box for maximum glide, or we can put the fin in the front of the box for maximum maneuverability. And the great thing about fin placement is that we can always adjust this. It's just a matter of testing, figuring out what feels great. As far as nose riding and gliding, that momentum in a singular direction, the back of the box is where I always put my fin. I find it's ideal for nose riding. Now, if you have your fin to the very back of the box and you feel that board a little difficult to turn and maneuver, then you can either move it to the middle or move it to the front of the box. This is an amazing thing because we can test this. We can see how it changes our board and either frees it up for maneuverability or gives it a bit more stability as we glide in a singular direction. And so if we're talking about surfboard brands, there's so many great, longboard shapers out there. My ultimate favorite longboard brand is Bing. I've had 2 Bings. They've been just amazing boards. And I was looking at all of these Bing surfboards, kind of thinking, okay, what has the design aspects that I just recommended to you? Now, if you notice, a lot of the design aspects that I did recommend to you is like pretty neutral. Like, I guess we want the size to favor the glide. We definitely want to favor the glide on the construction. But as far as the tail, we want to go neutral. As far as the midpoint, neutral. As far as the rails, we want neutral. The fin, I think we should favor glide a little bit more, and also with the fin placement as well. But if we look at this board, the Continental, I'd say this has a pretty neutral tail, not super blocky or big. The midpoint, right in the middle. Very hard to know what the rails are like on this board. And this is another thing I really want to iterate to you, is that going to the surf shop and feeling boards out and seeing how they feel under your arm and imagining yourself standing on these boards is the best way to find the right board for you. Just looking at pictures online, it's not very conducive to actually finding that right board for you. Going to the shop, picking up a bunch of boards, saying, oh, this feels just right, this feels too bulky, the tail on this board looks a little big, because the pictures do distort the tail size and some of the visual aspects of the board. Going to the shop and feeling boards out is the best way to find the right board for you. So that's what I would highly recommend, is that you go feel a lot of boards, go put them under your arm, and imagine yourself standing on it and seeing what really feels like your dream board when you put it under your arm and when you hold it. So I hope you found this helpful, just a little bit of knowledge about longboards and the design, and I hope it helps you pick out your dream board that you're going to enjoy for years and years.